Om Tava Kathamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavividiritam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Srimadaatatam Bhuiganantiye Bhurida Janaha. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We spent the past few classes discussing Sri Ramakrishna's momentous visit to Vidyasagar's house, and we've completed that last time. So we're starting on a new section, a completely new event. In the English translation, it's page 111, chapter 4, Advice to Householders. That's what it's called. August 13th, 1882. Now, okay, what I'll do is it's a short section actually. It's only about a little under 1.5 pages, which means that we'll have some scope for more interaction. So I'll actually ask questions, expecting you to be on the ball and answer these questions. Let's have a discussion about some things. Okay, so I split it into 3 sections. So let me read the first section of this bit. Chapter 4, Advice to Householders, August 13th, 1882. The master was conversing with Kedar and some other devotees in his room in the temple garden. Kedar was a government official and had spent several years at Dhaka in East Bengal, where he had become a friend of Bijoy Goswami. The two would spend a great part of their time together talking about Sri Ramakrishna and his spiritual experiences. Kedar had once been a member of the Brahma Samaj. He followed the path of Bhakti. Spiritual talk always brought tears to his eyes. It was 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Kedar was very happy that day, having arranged a religious festival for Sri Ramakrishna. A singer had been hired by Ram, and the whole day passed in joy. So let's pause here. So, as usual, my method is to compare the English translation with the original Bengali. So, this chapter in the original Bengali is titled Thakur Sri Ramakrishna Dakshineshware Narendradi Antarango O Onnanno Bhakta Sange, which means Thakur Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshineshwar with Narendra, the future Swami Medhananda, and many other of his inner circle of disciples, devotees, Antaranga, and other devotees as well, Onnanno Bhakta Sange. Pratham Pariched, so the first chapter in this new section, and then there's a kind of subtitle called Dakshineshware Kedarer Utsav. In Dakshineshwar, the festival put on by Kedar for Sri Ramakrishna, his devotee Kedar. All right. Now, I wanted to point out first some relatively minor discrepancies in the first paragraph. Now the mic is sort of working. It suddenly started. Okay, see, but it came on for like half a second and then disappeared again. I know, but I'm worried about online people. Online's fine, so we don't have to worry about anything. I'm not going to worry. If you're not worrying, I'm not worrying. All right. So, some relatively minor discrepancies first. The Bangla in this first paragraph says, Ishwarer kotha shunilei tahar chokhu ashrupunno hoito. And the English says here, it renders the sentence as, spiritual talk always brought tears to Kedar's eyes. In fact, what's said is, anytime God is spoken of, tears would come to his eyes. So spiritual talk is a little bit more general than that, but he's specifically he's a bhakta. And then, in the next paragraph in the original Bengali, M, the author of the Gospel, Mahendranath Gupta, he actually specifies many of the people who were in the room at the time, and that's not mentioned by Nikhilanandaji in the translation. So let me just read that. Ram, Manomohan, Shurendra, Rakhal, Bhavanath, Master Prabhuti, Onek Bhaktara Upasthit Achen. So that sentence is missing from the English translation. Ram, presumably Ramchandra Datta, Manomohan, Shurendra, Rakhal, who's the future Swami Brahmananda, Bhavanath, and the author of the gospel. All these people were present in the room at the time, so that's another detail. But most importantly, kind of astonishingly, in my opinion, there's one line omitted at the very end of the section I just read, so let me read to you. So, first of all, it mentions, Niklaanji mentions, a singer had been hired by Ram. So the Bengali word is ostad, so a professional singer. Okay. Right after that, it's mentioned in the Bangla, গানের সময় ঠাকুর সমাধিস্থ হইয়া ঘরে ছোট খাটটিতে বসিয়াছিলেন. Listening to the song performed by this ostad, by this great singer, Sri Ramakrishna goes into the state of samadhi. This detail is omitted from the English translation for some reason. But it's obviously extremely important. Whenever he goes into samadhi, it's important, especially because, well, we'll see why in a second. In the Bengali, the next section begins, okay? So in the original Bengali, there are smaller sections which are not kind of reflected in the English translation. So the next section has the following title. Samadhi Tattva o Sarva Dharma Samannoy, Hindu, Musulman or Christian. So M is writing that the topics that Sri Ramakrishna is about to speak about are as follows. Samadhi Tattva, the nature of samadhi. Sarva Dharma Samannoy, the harmony of all religions. Hindu, Musulman or Christian. So how is it that Hindus, Christians and Muslims can all reach the same goal? So that's the topic of this next section. So let me read to you now the next section from the English translation, then we'll go to the original again. The Master explained to the devotees the secret of communion with God. Master, with the realization of Satchit Ananda, one goes into samadhi. Then duties drop away. Suppose I've been talking about the ostad meaning the singer, the professional singer, and he arrives. What need is there of talking about him then? How long does the bee buzz around? So long as it isn't sitting on a flower. But it will not do for the sadhaka, the spiritual aspirant, to renounce duties. He should perform his duties such as worship, japa, meditation, prayer, and pilgrimage. If you see someone engaged in reasoning even after he has realized God, you may liken him to a bee, which also buzzes a little even while sipping honey from a flower. The Master was highly pleased with the Ustad's music. He said to the musician, "There is a special manifestation of God's power in a man who has any outstanding gift, such as proficiency in music." Musician, "Sir, what is the way to realize God?" Master, "Bhakti is the one essential thing. To be sure, God exists in all beings. Who then is a devotee? He whose mind dwells on God. But this is not possible as long as one has egotism and vanity. The water of God's grace cannot collect on the high mound of egoism. It runs down. I am a mere machine." Okay, there's a lot to discuss in this section. I'm pausing. It's not the end of the chapter, but I'm pausing here. First of all, let's look at the first sentence. The Master explained to the devotees the secret of communion with God. First question. Can you guys guess what the original Bengali of the phrase "the secret of communion with God" is? The secret of communion with God. Well, it's a hard question, especially for those who don't know Bengali. But anyway, Samadhi Tattva, almost. Samadhi Tattva. Samadhi Tattva. But I don't think you'd ever guess from the secret of communion with God that he's talking about samadhi here. But he's talking about the truth of samadhi. Why is that important? Partly because Sri Ramakrishna, elsewhere in the Gospel, he distinguishes two fundamentally different types of samadhi. We've talked about this in previous classes. What are the two main types of samadhi? There are many types of samadhi, but there's a kind of bhakti-oriented one, and then there's a jnana-oriented one. What are they called? What does he call them? Yeah. Bhava samadhi is the bhakti-oriented samadhi, where in samadhi, you're communing with the personal God. You're having a direct realization of the personal God, and you've lost all external consciousness. But there's a completely different type of samadhi, jada samadhi. Jada samadhi is the same as nirvikalpa samadhi. And this is advaitic nirvikalpa samadhi, and Sri Ramakrishna likens this to a salt doll that goes to measure the depth of the ocean, but the moment it sets foot in the ocean, what happens? It melts into the ocean. Here there's no subject-object duality. You're not realizing the personal God. You're just resting in your true nature as non-dual, pure consciousness. Okay? And I think it's important here that in the original Bangla, it stated, Thakur kotha koite koite samadhi tattva bujaitejen. He's explaining samadhi tattva. He's explaining the essence or nature of samadhi in general. Not specifically the bhakti kind of samadhi, not necessarily just the nirvikalpa samadhi, but kind of more generally. Okay? And I think that when you translate it as a secret of communion with God, I think it tilts it toward the bhakti direction. So, samadhi tattva, that's what he's explaining. Now do you see why it's so important that that previous line that was omitted in the previous section is mentioned? He just went into samadhi from listening to the song. So after coming back from the state of samadhi, he's then going to explain to all the people that are with him, let me just tell you what I've experienced. You see how that gets occluded in the translation. Okay, now let's look at how he starts to explain samadhi tattva, the essence of samadhi. With the realization of Satchit Ananda, one goes into samadhi. So see how he's being careful here. Satchit Ananda. Is that bhakti-oriented or is that jnana-oriented? Jnana? Is that what you're saying? I think it's both. That's my sense. I think it's equally bhakti and jnana. And it depends on how bhakti schools also accept that Brahman is Satchitananda, but they interpret Satchitananda differently from classical Advaita Vedantins. So I'd say Satchitananda itself is a kind of pan-Vedantic term. Like for instance, Sri Aurobindo. It's very interesting. He takes the chit in Satchitananda to mean chit shakti. Consciousness force is his English translation. So he builds into chit shakti, the shakti aspect of the divine reality. Of course, Shankara will not accept that. But you see how the same term Satchitananda can be interpreted in different ways, in creative ways, by different Vedantins. Okay? And again, I think it's significant because he's talking about samadhi in general. He wants to encompass both Jada Samadhi, the Advaita kind of Samadhi, where Satchitananda is understood as non-dual pure consciousness, and Bhakti-oriented Samadhi, Chetana Samadhi or Bhava Samadhi. He uses two different terms for that, where you're realizing the personal God in some form, Ishvara. Okay? Then he says, then duties drop away. When you attain the state of Samadhi, duties drop away. Here, the term in Bangla is karma. There's a subtle difference here. Tokhon kormo tag hoye jay, he says. Okay, so work drops away. That's another translation of karma. But I think it becomes clear, what are his examples of the kind of work that he's thinking of? He mentions it toward the end. Worship, japa, meditation, prayer, pilgrimage. What kind of work are these? These are spiritual practices, right? So I think that context is really important here. It's not that you just stop working altogether. Otherwise, you might think that he's moving in a Shankarite direction or something like that. But no, he means until you attain the state of samadhi, you should be hard at work in your spiritual practices. You should not ever flag in your efforts in making spiritual progress. That's the idea. But once you realize God, you've attained the goal, you don't need to engage in spiritual practices anymore. Typically. But then he says, sometimes you'll find some people, he says, if you see someone engaged in reasoning even after he has realized God, you may liken him to a bee, which also buzzes a little even while sipping honey from a flower. Sometimes people ask, you find it in the Leela Prasanga, that Sri Ramakrishna, who's considered an avatara, an incarnation, he spent years engaged in intense austerities and spiritual practices. And so there's this question of why would God himself, in the form of a human being, have to engage in spiritual practices at all? Any thoughts on that? Yeah. How might you answer that? Yeah. That can you give a mic to her? Thank you. 1 second. Okay, you can shout. Go ahead.
Test.
Just that concept of spirit needing an alloy to be in human form. So even if you're God, if you're in the human wiring, it makes sense if you take this on that you would need to work with the human wiring and do the spiritual practices to bring God out of you. Because if you're in the human body, you still have drives, and you need them to stay alive, like drinking and eating.
Keep the mic closer to you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Like drinking and eating and things like that. Yeah. So if I'm God and I come in a human body, I still need those drives, and those might interfere with my God consciousness. So I'd keep those practices going up.
Yeah, that's an interesting suggestion. This reminds me of one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Ponchabhute fade brahma pore kande, which means when even Brahman, when it's caught in the net of the 5 elements, ends up crying, weeping. So you're suggesting that God is fine, but the moment it enters a body, it has to accept the kind of...
You have to work with it, right?
Yeah, you have to work with the hardware that you're stuck in, or whatever. That's an interesting suggestion. Any other thoughts on, why would an avatara have to engage in spiritual practices? Niranjana?
I don't think he has to. I think he's the example for us.
Right.
So he's doing it to teach us how to live and how to be as an example. So
right.
I think
Thank you. Yeah. So that's another a common response or explanation of why an avatara would do spiritual practices, to set an example for the rest of us. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yad yad acharati shreshthas tat tat evetu rojanaha, which means that which the best do, others follow. We all need role models. So even in spiritual life, who's a better role model than God, right? That's the idea. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So the other thing I wanted to mention, Sri Ramakrishna is very pleased with the singer because he felt that he really sang with bhava. Sri Ramakrishna was never just impressed with technical skill. He's looking at your heart, and he could tell that the singer was speaking with genuine feeling. So he tells him there's a special manifestation of God's power in a man who has any outstanding gift, such as proficiency in music. যে মানুষে একটি বড় গুণ আছে, যেমন সঙ্গীত বিদ্যা, তাতে ঈশ্বরের শক্তি আছে বিশেষ রূপে. Does this remind you of anything from the Gita? Gita quiz? No one? Chapter 10, huh?
I dropped out, remember?
Oh yeah, I know. I forgive you. 10.41 of the Gita. Yad yad vibhutimat sattvam shrimad urjitam eva va tat tat eva vagachatvam mama tejonsha sambhavam. Krishna says, so the whole chapter 10 is called Vibhuti Yoga. All the different, or not all, but many of the different special manifestations of God. And there's a whole list of examples. There's a special manifestation of God in Om, for instance, among all sounds, and many other examples. And at the very end of the chapter, Krishna says, anywhere you find some exceptional gift, some exceptional quality in a human being, know for certain that there's a special manifestation of me in that person. So, and Sri Ramakrishna elsewhere in the Gospel explicitly quotes that verse from the Gita, actually, because he knew the Gita very well, and he mentions it. So I think he has in mind this. Now, another question for you guys. Why would Sri Ramakrishna tell the singer this? How is that benefiting the singer? Might it not go to his head? He'll be like, oh, yeah, God's, or what? What's the idea? What do you think the idea is? Why do you think Sri Ramakrishna is telling him that? Any thoughts? Narayana and then Niranjana.
Well, I think it reinforces his heart. It could go to his head, but he's trying to reinforce the beauty of his inner understanding, and so he's bringing it out so that maybe the singer will keep emphasizing that. Yeah,
excellent. I think that's a very good suggestion, especially in the context of the next paragraph, where the musician asks, "Sir, what is the way to realize God?" And he says, "Bhakti is the one essential thing." And then we'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, I think that's right. By saying that, look, you've got this exceptional gift, but don't let that go to your head. Know that it's the divine itself manifesting in you, so that you should use this gift to serve God and to worship God to the best of your ability. Something like that. Yeah? Yeah, Niranjana?
Well, that's kind of what I was going to say.
Okay.
To set the stage for what he wants to share.
Exactly, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And Leela?
It sets the stage for what he wants to say, but also with the use of tone, sound in general is a precursor to the creation of the Bhakti. feeling and emotion that comes from everything that he wants to reinforce and what he actually says by speech.
Yeah, I think he could sense that the singer is a very strong bhakta. And so he knows that the way to his heart is through bhakti. So I think that's right, yeah. And so, not coincidentally, when the musician asks point blank, "Sir, what is the way to realize God?" Sri Ramakrishna says, let me read it to you again. Bhakti is the one essential thing. Bhakti shar. There are many ways Sri Ramakrishna could answer this question. In fact, in other places in the Gospel, other devotees ask the same question, Upai ki, and he doesn't give the same answer. But he can see into the hearts of every single person, right? So he could tell that this is what that person needs. Bhakti is the one essential thing. And then he says, to be sure, God exists in all beings. Who then is a bhakta? He whose mind, of course, always remember that in Bengali, there are no gendered pronouns. So the he is misleading. That person whose mind is better. That person whose mind dwells on God. But this is not possible as long as one has egotism and vanity. So I think this is along the lines of what Narayana was suggesting, is that he's kind of cautioning the singer not to let his exceptional musical talents go to his head and make him feel egoistic. Always remember that you're doing this as a service to the divine. The water of God's grace cannot collect on the high mound of egotism. Here, egotism, the high mound of egotism, the word egotism is used in the previous sentence, right? This is not possible as long as one has egotism and vanity. Let me give you the Bengali words here. So, jar mon, okay. Ar ahankar obhiman thakle hoy na. So egotism is the English translation of ahankar, ahankara. And vanity is a translation of obhiman. Obhiman is a very hard word to translate into English. It might be impossible, actually. But it's a certain kind of, it's a form of ego. It's like a feeling of self-importance, maybe, something like that. And people become very sensitive if you have a lot of abhimana. But when he talks about the high mound of egotism, it's not the same word. It's not ahankara. It's ami roop dhipite ishore kripa roop jol jomena goriye jai. Ami roop dhipite, the high mound of ami, of I. Ami just means I in Bangla. So just that sense of I, the high mound of I. God's grace, the water of God's grace cannot collect on the high mound of that feeling of I, right? And then he immediately adds, I'm a mere machine, ami jontro. So that's the right attitude. How should you think of yourself? As an instrument of the divine, right? I am a great singer, I am impressing all these people, I am a great devotee, I am a great spiritual aspirant. All that comes from ego. I'm an instrument of the divine. That's the right attitude. So that's what he's teaching this musician. Here, I find it striking that Sri Ramakrishna's answer dovetails really nicely with what are essentially the two most important verses in the Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 18, after Krishna has given a whole slew of teachings to Arjuna in the course of 18 chapters, he says, after all this, I'm going to teach you the highest secret in 2 verses. But this is so precious and so secret that you must not divulge this to anyone who is devoid of austerities, na tapaskaya, and na bhaktaya kadachana, and never to anyone who is devoid of faith, bhakti. Because they'll misunderstand it, they'll criticize you for it, they'll say, what kind of teaching is this? What are these teachings? Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaisasi satyayam mame vaisasi satyayam. Okay, anyway. Hold on. I'm going to get this. Manmana bhavamat bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaisasi satyam te pratijane priyosime. That's it. Okay. So, manmana bhavamat bhakto. Krishna says to Arjuna, have your mind on me exclusively. Concentrate your mind on me. Your mind should be thinking of me always. Mad bhakto. You should be my bhakta. You should be devoted to me always. Madhyaji. You should sacrifice to me. Everything you do it as a sacrifice to the divine. Mam namaskuru. You should do namaskars to me, which means always be worshiping me. If you do all this, you will enter into me. That is my promise. Why? Priyosime. It's very beautiful. There's one thing that's striking in the Gita, as opposed to other texts like Bhagavata Purana and the Bible, where Jesus is the God of love. You rarely find Krishna saying, I love you, Arjuna. But this is one of those places. Priyosi, he says. I love you, Arjuna. It's because I love you that all you have to do to get liberation is to think of me as much as you can. That's it. How wonderful. So this is exactly what Sri Ramakrishna is saying. Who is a devotee? That person whose mind dwells on God. So that corresponds to the first verse. But then what's the next verse in the Gita? Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Abandoning all dharmas. So all kinds of, like, I have to do this much japa, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to avoid doing this, it doesn't mean anything goes. It means don't be so rigid in terms of your spiritual practices. It should be more coming from the heart. Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam vraja, which means take refuge in me alone. Ahantva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shuchaha. Don't worry, I will liberate you from all sins. I'll take care of the rest. Surrender to me and think of me at all times, and that's it. That's all you have to do. And this is how I see it. When Sri Ramakrishna says, but this is not possible as long as one has egotism and vanity, the next verse in the Gita. He's saying, you need to think of me at all times, but it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do that unless you renounce ego and take refuge in God. That's the idea. Be humble. So long as you have ego, you will not be able to think of God. You're going to be thinking of 100 other things, but not God. So that's the idea. Okay? All right. Now, third and last section. Master. No, not master. Okay. To Kedar and the other devotees. So Sri Ramakrishna is still speaking. Sri Ramakrishna says, God can be realized through all paths. All religions are true. The important thing is to reach the roof. You can reach it by stone stairs or by wooden stairs or by bamboo steps or by a rope. You can also climb up by a bamboo pole. You may say that there are many errors and superstitions in another religion. I should reply, suppose there are. Every religion has errors. Everyone thinks that his watch alone gives the correct time. It is enough to have yearning for God. It is enough to love him and feel attracted to him. Don't you know that God is the inner guide? He sees the longing of our heart and the yearning of our soul. Suppose a man has several sons. The older boys address him distinctly as Baba or Papa, but the babies can at best call him Ba or Pa. Now, will the father be angry with those who address him in this indistinct way? The father knows that they too are calling him, only they cannot pronounce his name well. All children are the same to the Father. Likewise, the devotees call on God alone, though by different names. They call on one person only. God is one, but his names are many. That's the end of this chapter. There's a lot here as well. These are his famous teachings on the harmony of all religions. In fact, if you go to Kolkata and you mention Sri Ramakrishna, many people who know nothing about Sri Ramakrishna will say, yes, Jatamat Tatapat. They'll just repeat this, his most famous teaching, as many faiths, so many paths. He's famous for it. But one thing that is more rarely done is deep critical thinking about exactly how he harmonized all the different world religions. It's not so easy, actually, to understand it. And in fact, if you go deep into the scholarship, what you'll find is that there are different interpretations of his views on the harmony of religions. Even among the monks of the order, there are some differences of opinion on this issue. So let me try to discuss some of these issues now. He says, God can be realized through all paths. All religions are true. This statement, all religions are true, is quite striking. The Bangla it's quite accurate, the translation. He says, সব পথ দিয়ে তাঁকে পাওয়া যায় সব ধর্মই সত্য সত্য he's using the word satya here which means true all religions are true what do you think he means by that what do you think he means when he says all religions are true yeah what do you mean can you give him the mic please what do you mean by that all religions are
that they have salvific effect but they don't have to be like literally true. They're just instrumentally
excellent
true.
thank you yeah I think that's a very good suggestion at least I agree with you other people can disagree so yes he made a nice point he said that when Sri Ramakrishna says all religions are true what Sri Ramakrishna really means is all religions are instrumentally true in the sense that they are all effective paths to the same highest goal of liberation or God realization right yeah I think that's right why and we shouldn't take it in like too literally why before we get to, why shouldn't we take the statement to mean all religions are true in the sense of doctrinal truth yeah Katyayani and then Niranjana yeah is this related to this or
That was the answer to your first question.
okay I'll get to her yeah but can you first come I want to follow up first and then we'll get to her yeah Katyayani
Because different religions might say one thing that contradicts another religion.
excellent very good she's a born philosopher so in philosophy of religion when they talk about what's called religious pluralism which is the view that Sri Ramakrishna endorses there's a huge problem the problem is called the problem of conflicting religious truth claims simple example did Christ die on the cross you might be looking at me like I'm crazy duh obviously that's the whole basis of Christianity that's true except what do Muslims say nope Christ did not die on the cross conflicting religious truth claim so now if Sri Ramakrishna is saying all religions are true that means Christianity he's saying is true Islam is true but Christianity is saying Christ died on the cross Islam is saying Christ did not die on the cross so where does that leave Sri Ramakrishna committing a contradiction he has to be committed to the claim that Christ died on the cross and that Christ didn't die on the cross. Another conflicting truth claim. Is there rebirth? Is this our only life or were we born in the past and are we going to be reborn again? Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism say yes. Orthodox Christianity, Judaism, Islam say no. Same problem. So if we take the statement to be literally true, we land in all sorts of contradictions. And that's why I think we shouldn't take it in that sense. And there are other reasons why. Because the context doesn't justify that reading. Because he literally in the previous sentence said God can be realized through all paths. So he's explained what he means by all religions are true. He means that every religion is an effective path to realizing God, right? And he gives the example of reaching the roof, right? Now we can come to you again and then back to Niranjana. Oh, you don't need to? Oh, look at that. So people are anticipating your answers. Yeah, go ahead.
Just the concept of all religions being true, if
Yeah.
you study all the different religions really deeply and you
Yeah.
get past some of the stories and the disagreements, a lot of them have the same basic truths. So I think he could also be saying to get past the stories or arguments, was this a metaphor, was this a true happening, and get to like the real meaning of it. And once you do that, the religions agree. So that could be something that he's pointing to, like saying get past all these cultural stories and get to the heart of the path, you know?
Yeah, thank you. That's also good. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're suggesting that there are, even among religious doctrines, some are more essential or more fundamental than others. And that religions might differ on the more, what Swami Medhananda sometimes calls secondary details. But that on the fundamental issues, there's a core commonality across the religions. And I think that's right. And I think Sri Ramakrishna will say that the core commonality is the divine, is at the heart of all religions. Even though that divine is understood, perceived, realized, named in many different ways. But the same divine at the center of all religions. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. Anna?
Furthermore, I believe that virtually every religion that's practiced on earth has a method that is taught in its practice to keep God on your mind, whether it be by the repetition of the name of God or the repetition of the prayers to God or some other form of scripture. And they also all involve different methods that are taught within each tradition, albeit every religion has a different tradition of methods. And so regardless of religion itself could be a tool to develop greater bhakti, to develop greater jnana. So perhaps it's not that every religion is true, but regardless of religion, it is possible to use whatever religion you were born into to attain those higher goals.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, another thing. I want to mention two common misconceptions about Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on the harmony of religions, two ways that his views have been misinterpreted. Number one, so I'll mention the scholar's name, just so that you don't think I'm strawmanning these people. Do you know what that means? It's a scholarly term. To strawman someone means you're criticizing a view of somebody, but you don't name the person. Okay, so the person is Frank Morales, Morales. Just called him out. Okay. He wrote a book called Radical Universalism, and it's a big attack on Sri Ramakrishna and the harmony of religions. And he says that Sri Ramakrishna is blatantly wrong in claiming that all religions are true. But he takes all religions are true in the literal sense, which I think we've now agreed is the wrong interpretation. Do you see? So that he's kind of conveniently misinterpreting Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, I think. And one of the other criticisms made by Morales in the same book is that Sri Ramakrishna mistakenly claims that all religions lead to the same goal. Okay? And the way that Morales puts it is, that's just clearly wrong. The Christian goal is not the same as the Muslim goal. The Muslim goal is not the same as Buddhist nirvana. The Buddhist nirvana goal is not the same as the Advaita goal of non-dual pure consciousness. How can they all be the same goal? Tricky question. How might you answer the question? Let's go back to the metaphor he's using. He says, the important thing is to reach the roof. You can reach it by stone stairs or by wooden stairs or by bamboo steps or by a rope. You can also climb up by a bamboo pole. Here's the question. What is the roof here?
Yeah, you don't have to call it a roof. You could call it heaven. You could call it...
Let's get her the mic. Your
Obviously, it could be for each person. It could be a low bed, it could be a heaven,
Yeah.
It could be just dissolving back into nothing. That's all.
Yeah. Right. So the roof encompasses all of these different religious goals. That's what you're saying, right? But how? How is that possible? Why isn't that just a hodgepodge of contradictions? Anyone? Quoting my book.
If all the religions weren't talking about the same thing, then he's postulating that they're different gods. It's
Who's
like
the he here? Sri Ramakrishna?
Morales.
Oh, Morales.
Is postulating that there's different end
well,
gods.
No, what he's
so there's
saying
different
is
gods.
he's an exclusivist, and he believes that if one religion is true, other religions must be false. And from that standpoint, from the standpoint of exclusivism, he's saying that pluralism is bogus, because the moment you say that different religions can lead to the same goal, you're landing in contradictions. I believe one religion is true, that means all the other religions are false. That's his standpoint, but
that's bogus.
Well, I'll give you an example of it's at least it's a goad for critical thinking. All right, how about that? All right. We all need purvapakshas, Purvapaksha, you know what that means? In traditional Indian philosophy, like Shankara's commentaries and other ones, what they do is, to defend their own view, what they do is they imagine an opponent, an imaginary opponent, who gives a position, which is not the view that Shankara, for instance, endorses. But he'll put words in the mouth of this Purvapaksha position, Purvapakshan. And they'll say things like, yes, I believe that jnana can be combined with karma. And then Shankara says, here's why you're wrong. And that's what he calls a siddhanta. That's his own view. And he refutes the Purvapaksha. So it's helpful to come up with Purvapakshas, and it helps you to solidify your faith and your understanding of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on the harmony of religions by by even thinking about how people have criticized his views, misunderstood them, then your own understanding of his teachings will be clear. That's the idea. Now, now coming back to this issue of the roof, how is it possible that all these different goals can be equally true and valuable. Buddhist nirvana, Advaitic pure consciousness, Vaikuntha Loka, Ramakrishna Loka, Christian heaven, Jannah of the Muslim heaven. How? Yeah, go ahead, Niranjana.
Is it the idea of the elephant? Yeah,
Good.
like we're all touching the elephant.
Very good.
It's just different.
Thank you. Elephant. See? One word. And yeah, exactly. We're all on the same page here. There's a giant elephant, and there are 5 blind men, each touching a different part of the elephant, and they start quarreling with each other. Why? Because the guy touching the trunk says, the elephant's dry and scaly, and the guy touching the tail says, no, you're wrong, you're stupid. The elephant's very soft and furry, and they argue. There's one person who comes to adjudicate this argument. Who is that person? The person who can see the whole elephant. What does that correspond to in Sri Ramakrishna's lexicon? Does anyone know? Look at that. You guys are astute students of my work and my lecture. Yes, exactly. The Vijnani. Why? What makes the Vijnani so special? Unlike even most realized souls who only realize a single aspect or form of the divine reality, the Vijnani has a more expansive knowledge of the infinite divine reality in multiple aspects and forms. Look at Sri Ramakrishna's own life. How many different forms of God did he realize? Krishna, Radha, Hanuman, Rama, Sita, Kali, obviously. Advaita, the non-dual pure consciousness. So many. Ramlala. The list goes on. So he was the Vijnani. He was the ideal Vijnani. And so the Vijnani says, on the basis of his or her own spiritual experience, you guys are all right. But you're wrong in limiting the divine to that aspect or form of the divine that you are realizing. Never put a limit to God. Never say God can only be this and nothing more. So it's because God is infinite that the paths to God are infinite, you see? So that's why of all of the teachings in the Harmony religions that you can find in the gospel, my all-time favorite is Tini Ananto, Patho Ananto. God is infinite and the paths to God are infinite. There are infinite paths to God because God himself, herself, itself is infinite. That's the beauty of it. That means that that infinite divine is impersonal. That means that same infinite divine is also personal. In its personal dimension, it can manifest in infinite forms. Krishna, Radha, Sita, Kali, Christ, this and that, Ganesha, and so on and so forth. Countless. God will come again. Yada yada hi dharmasya glani bhavati bharata abhyuttanam dharmasya tadatmana. God will incarnate any time that there's a waning of righteousness and a waxing of unrighteousness. So God will come again in human form. There's no end to the forms of the divine. That's the idea. So the roof here, now, why do I bring all this up? Because even within the order, there are some monks and there are some scholars who claim that Sri Ramakrishna harmonized all of the world religions on the basis of Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta. So what do they say? What they say is that what Sri Ramakrishna meant is that the common goal of all religions, the roof, is Nirguna Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. What do you think about that view? Agree, disagree, somewhere in between? Anyone? Leela?
Disagree, because
Why?
just on his own life, and his recognition of Vijnana, his ability to be able to see that God is both personal and impersonal.
Yeah, right. So you disagree because Sri Ramakrishna himself realized God as both personal and impersonal, and he never felt that the personal God was in any way inferior or less real or somehow penultimate in relation to the impersonal. Yeah, any other thoughts on that? Okay. Yeah, sounds good, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. So the thing is, here's another issue with taking the common goal of all religions to be just Nirguna Brahman, which is Shankara's, impersonal pure consciousness. The problem is, where does that leave theistic religious paths? Any bhakti path, whether that's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or theistic Hindu paths, where does it leave them? It means through your theistic path, you can, at best, realize some form of the personal God, but that's not liberation. You'll never get liberated that way. How do you get liberation? Stop your bhakti practices. At some point, you have to stop. And then you practice Jnana Yoga, which is the highest path, and then you can realize the highest goal, which is realization of your true nature as non-dual pure consciousness. It's not good enough to eat sugar. You have to become sugar. You see, I'm using Sri Ramakrishna's metaphors here. That's what it would amount to. If you take the common goal of all religions in a narrower way to mean just non-dual, impersonal, pure consciousness, you're kind of straitjacketing all the world's religions, and you're especially putting bhakti, devotional paths, on a lower footing than the path of knowledge, maybe Buddhism. Does that make sense? There becomes a kind of hierarchy. Whereas I think when he harmonizes the world religions, there's no hierarchy. Through any path, whether any kind of bhakti path, devotional path, whether it's Buddhism or Advaita Vedanta, any path, you can reach the same goal. And that goal he understands very expansively as the impersonal, personal, infinite divine reality. Okay. Now, we get to the final paragraph. I've read it, but now let me read it again because it's really important. And I also want to mention another important omission at the very end of this chapter. Okay, Sri Ramakrishna says, you may say that there are many errors and superstitions in another religion. I should reply, suppose there are. Every religion has errors. This is also a wonderful statement. Every religion has errors. This is another reason why, when he says all religions are true, we can't take it in the literal sense that 100% of all the doctrines of all religions are true. It's clearly not what he's saying. He himself says every religion has some mistakes. No religion has a monopoly on the truth, right? And he says everybody thinks their own watch tells the correct time. But in fact, no watch tells exactly the correct time. We have to kind of modify that these days because of GPS and satellites and all that. But now, here we get to an interesting question. In terms of, so what is the purpose of, or what's the use, what's the value of religious doctrine? And something that she brought up earlier, I think is relevant here. Okay, let's take an example, right? Was Christ God? Was Christ an incarnation? Or in the Hindu context, there's a live question. Was Krishna God? Was Krishna an incarnation? And there's some traditions within Hinduism that don't accept it. Others that take it to be the cornerstone of their faith, like Vaishnavism, obviously, but also other traditions within Hinduism. Aren't these important doctrines? And so if that doctrine is true or false, shouldn't that matter? So what do you think? If Christ really was God, that's got to be pretty important. And then Islam's got that wrong, because Islam doesn't believe that Christ was God. They believe he was a prophet, but not that he was God himself. Right? Just as an example. So here's my take on it. When it comes to religious doctrines about the nature of God, these doctrines are very important, but they're important for the practitioners of the respective religions. So that Christ is God is obviously fundamental to the faith of Christians. But is that fundamental to the faith of Muslims? No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, she's a nice expression in German. Noch einmal bitte? Yeah, oh, they should eat their own soup. Yes, that's nice, yes. Using a very Ramakrishnan metaphor. Each person should eat his or her own soup. Yes, very good, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, here's the idea. I see Sri Ramakrishna's view as, look, and he would say, because remember his context, late 19th century, okay? Brahmo Samaj was very popular at the time. Brahmo Samaj did not accept incarnations, didn't accept any forms of God. They don't believe in Krishna as God. And what he would tell followers of the Brahmo Samaj is, it's fine that you don't accept that Krishna is God. No problem. That won't harm you. But nonetheless, try to learn from the Vaishnavas. What can you learn from the Vaishnavas? You should learn their tremendous longing for God. If you learn nothing else from Vaishnavas, if you don't have to accept their doctrine that Krishna is God, but we can learn from them that longing, that intense longing that Radha had for Krishna. Try to develop that, cultivate that longing in your own heart. So there's something to learn from all religions. You don't have to accept the doctrines of other religions, right? But you should try to learn from all religions. And the most fundamental thing to learn from any religion is vyakulata. That's what that's the Bengali term for yearning for God. Intense longing for the divine. That's the idea. If you have that, it doesn't really matter what path you follow. Yeah, Leela has a question. Can we bring it to her?
Well, a little less a question than an observation, which would suggest, as what you're saying, that not only are the doctrines central to the religion at the moment it's being presented, but at the time that it's being presented. For example, with Christ being placed in a political hotbed of activity between Judaism, Pharisees control Rome and its influence through its outer borders. All of that has to be presented, and to the specific type of devotee that the Christians were at that time. Each avatar would be able to speak to not only the doctrine itself, but in its time base and the type of devotee that he's approaching.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah, I think it's right to emphasize historical context. And so God incarnates in a particular form at a particular time in a particular country for particular reason, right? Yeah, I think that's right. And the only thing that I would avoid is or to be cautious about is to restrict the incarnation to just their age. So that means, Krishna, that was relevant back then, but not anymore. But I don't think that would be right either. There's a universal element to the incarnation that transcends historical boundaries as well. Yes.
Actually, I have a statement on that point.
Yeah.
Right, because we would assume that these spiritual teachers understand that their teachings are going to live beyond their own context.
Yeah.
Right? So they would
Yeah.
put into their teachings a more general
Yeah, that's right.
meaning.
I think that
also.
they balance both. They balance the temporal with the universal, with the transhistorical. You know what I mean? The historical and transhistorical, and they're kind of. You can see that in Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. He was fully aware of his own time, and yet he would also give these universal teachings. Yeah.
I feel like this really ties into the beginning of the reading when he's saying, Ramakrishna is saying God is in any man that has a particular skill, like singing. So if you're studying dance or you're studying music, it's the same religious process in a way that you're falling in love with the divine of that art, and you're subsuming it. Your ego you're releasing it to learn the technique. And so you end up with a type of focused devotion very similar to what you get from a religion. So I just think it's interesting, like what you're talking about really ties into that first concept in the gospel that you're reading.
And there's that famous concept in positive psychology, Csikszentmihalyi, flow, and that you're able to enter into a flow state through anything that you're really good at, but that's also challenging at the same time.
Well, they have that saying about how can you tell the dancer from the dance?
Yeah,
like once you're really dancing.
Yeah, that's a nice Yeats line, I think, from a Yeats poem. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, the quote from T.S. Eliot is one of my favorites.
Yeah.
On Sunday.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Good. Nice callback. Thank you. Yeah. Good. Okay, yes. Nish has a question, and then I want to get to the omission.
So Swamiji's statement, art, science, and religion are all paths to the same goal, but only if you understand Advaita. Can you unpack that for me, actually, with regards to this dance and science, etc.?
Yeah, that's interesting. Look, the thing is, when Swami Vivekananda uses the word Advaita, we have to be very careful about what he means. And different people have interpreted it in different ways. I think the wrong way, I don't want to say wrong, the narrow way to interpret it as is just, he means Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. I don't think that's right. I think he meant it in the broader Vijnana sense, which is Advaita is there's one non-dual divine reality, which is personal in one aspect and impersonal in another aspect. You see, and if you there's nothing but that divine. So if everything is divine, and Sri Aurobindo, one of his famous statements is all life is yoga. Then we get back to it plugs in with what she's saying. Then literally everything can be a yoga. That means artistic practice can be yoga, dancing can be yoga, scientific endeavor can be yoga.
Does the scientist or dancer have to know that for it to become a yoga, or is it just automatically a yoga?
Well, the thing is, yoga can be conscious or unconscious. Everybody will eventually attain liberation. Sri Ramakrishna will say everybody will be fed. Some at 6 a.m, others at noon, others at 6 p.m. But if you're conscious, the process is accelerated. I think that's the difference, right? Yeah.
Everything. The attitude becomes when you give your life, everything that you do becomes an offering. Everything, when God is on your mind continually, all that you do from the moment you get up.
If you do it as a spiritual
Correct.
practice, but of course not everybody does.
Not
right?
everybody
You
does.
can become extremely attached to the work and be very egoistic in the
well,
work.
but that's all those things. But in the ideal is what she's saying.
Right,
When you have that heart attitude, everything. So you're a living offering, or I would say sacrifice, but it's one and the same. Everything becomes an offering. Everything is So it's who's doing it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so let me wrap this up by mentioning, and then we can take, I don't know if there are any online questions, but there may be. But before we get to them, but first, let me mention at the very end, there's a whole paragraph which Nikhilanji omits, which I think is quite striking. Here's what the Bangla says. Abar bhaktera tankei nana name dakche, ek bhaktikei dakche. That is rendered here. The translation would be, the devotees call on God alone, though by different names. Okay. Then, Sri Ramakrishna introduces another metaphor to explain the harmony of all religions, not mentioned by Nikhilanandaji, and it's multiple sentences. Ek pukured charti ghat. In a lake, there are 4 ghats. Another word that's difficult to translate. I think bank would be the best translation of ghat. Let's say north, east, south, west. So in the 4 corners of the lake, there are different steps leading into it. Okay, then he says, Hindura jol khache ek ghate bolche jol. The Hindus, at one of these 4 ghats, is drinking water and calling it jol. That's the Bengali word for water. Musulmanra ar ek ghate khache bolche pani. The Muslims, at let's say the east ghat of the same lake, are drinking the same lake water, but calling it what? What are they calling it? Pani, the Hindi word for water. Yeah, Urdu and Hindi, right? Ingrejra ar ek ghate khache bolche water. This is one of those, there's actually an entire article, I think published in Prabuddha Bharata. Mahendranath brought it to my attention. Some intrepid researcher found all of the different English words that Sri Ramakrishna used. He uses really interesting words like philosophy. He used the word philosophy, pronounced like a Bengali. Science. And really funny ones like B. Gupta's fever mixture, and like other stuff. So there's another thing. He's using the word water, but using, like pronouncing it like a Bengali, water. So he's saying that English people, right, Westerners, the British colonial occupiers of India, they drink the same lake water from a different ghat and they call it water. Abar unno log ek ghate bolche aqua. And now he even used the word aqua, interestingly. He's like, other people at a different ghat call the same water aqua. Right? And this whole metaphor is omitted. I know, it's mentioned elsewhere. I think what happened is Nikhilanji is like, oh, you guys, you've heard it too many times. Yeah. So he may have said, all right, it's enough already. But I think it's important to keep the repetitions because you get a sense of the teachings that Sri Ramakrishna keeps coming back to. And even when he tells the same story or uses the same metaphor, there might be slight variations, which are quite interesting. So I think there are different reasons for wanting to keep everything in there as was. So yeah, that's what I want to say. Now, online questions.
For Bhakti, why is love emotion emphasized always?
The love emotion, is that what you said?
Yes. Why is the love emotion emphasized always? Won't Sarva Bhavan mean all emotions of mind?
Sarva Bhavan? What, Bhava?
Bhava.
So all the bhavas. Yeah, why is love only emphasized? See, the final goal is prema. It's love of God. But Sri Ramakrishna would say there are many different relationships you can have with God. There are many different attitudes you can adopt toward God. And they're all forms of love in a way, but that love has different shades. So you can love somebody like a friend. You can love God in that way. You can love someone like God is your child. You can love God like God is your parent, mother, father. So they're all different forms of love. Now, why is bhakti defined just in terms of love? Is the question, why can't we also think of bhakti in terms of other emotions? I think there are other emotions, like longing. Vyakulata is a term that Sri Ramakrishna uses, which is not identical to love. But even jealousy, Sri Ramakrishna would say, if you have selfish impulses, like lust and greed and jealousy and anger, fine. Turn them toward God. he says. You can turn even jealousy toward God. Be jealous and tell God, why aren't you revealing yourself to me? Be angry at God. So I think there are other emotions, and these all can, in a broader sense, can all fall under bhakti, I think. Okay, any other questions? One more, all right.
Is prema bhakti the flow state of God?
That's interesting. Prema bhakti, is it the flow state of God? First of all, prema bhakti, I think, is referring to the bhakta, not God, but God always loves us. God is bhaktavatsal, as Krishna says to Arjuna, Priyosi, we're all dear to him, he loves us. But we don't feel that love for God. We also love God, actually. There's a place in the Complete Works when somebody asked Swami Medhananda, how do I develop bhakti? And his answer was, you are already bhaktas. You just don't know it because there's this layer of kama kanchana, lust and greed. These layers of mud covering over your innate love for God. We're all bhaktas, actually. We just don't know it. So we have to uncover that innate bhakti within us. All right. Okay, any last thoughts before we wrap it up? Yeah, Nish, can you bring the mic to Nishant and we can wrap it up?
I'm not sure that I understand Swamiji's disclaimer there, because Sister Nivedita hones in on this, and this would be like kind of a crowning glory of Swamiji's teaching.
Yeah.
This is God. So karma yoga, I don't need God. I can be an atheist and I do karma yoga and I'll be free, right? But that statement only, he makes it quite exclusive, only with the knowledge of Advaita. Does he mean I have to know that this is consciousness? Only then?
No, but I think you have to be careful. First of all, I mean, whenever there aren't texts in front of us, I think there's a danger of putting words into his mouth. So, I mean, I want to see the exact statement. But the thing is, you, as far as I remember, you paraphrased his statement as saying art, religion, and philosophy all can lead to the same.
I think he said art, science, and religion.
Maybe. That's possible. The thing is, we have to see what exactly he says. But the thing is, that's not in the context of the harmony of religions. Yeah. And I wouldn't just conflate those two things. You see what I mean? So I think that his mature view on the harmony of religions is as follows. And by mature, I mean that starting in mid-1895 to the end of his life. He says there are two key premises. Number one, each of the four yogas is a direct path to liberation. Karma yoga, Jnana yoga, Bhakti yoga, Raja yoga. Premise two, each of the world religions corresponds to one or more of the four yogas. Yes. 3, conclusion. Therefore, all of the world religions are equally capable of taking us to the highest goal of liberation. Do you see? So it's a very elegant argument, and he makes it in a number of places. I prove that, or show it, in chapter 3 of my book on Vivekananda.
Couldn't you add art, science, etc.?
I don't think he's claiming. See, that's why you have to be careful about context and stuff. That's why I want to see the. I don't think he's talking in the context of the harmony of religions there. Yeah, right. You look at chapter, because he has a lecture called The Necessity of Religion, where he's giving a very broad understanding of what counts as a religion. He says that a religion is anything that posits an ideal unit abstraction. That's a term he uses. We can abbreviate it as IUA, ideal unit abstraction. And it's broad enough to encompass not only religions that accept a transcendental reality like God or an eternal soul, but even, he says, just believing in the moral law. Yeah. Or in the ideal human. So he believes even that a kind of ethical humanism could be a form of religion. Right. So he's very broad. So I'm saying that's possible. But there still has to be an ideal unit abstraction posited. Right. Okay. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. I guess one last thought.
Coming back to that.
Let's wait for the mic for the benefit of the online audience.
So that first question you asked us about why would God coming in a human body like a realized soul, why would they have to be doing those practices? You know, a few of us had answers. And I'm curious, like, what your idea is about this, like the hybrid of a consciousness coming into an animal body. Mm-hmm. Like the animal still has karma, right? The body, born of a mother, has some kind of human DNA karma. But then you take this consciousness and you hybrid it together. Like, why do you know, I'm just curious what you would think about that.
Yeah, I would go with Niranjana's answer, which is just, he's setting an example for the rest of us. Really? Yeah, and because it's so inspiring to see somebody actually go through all the spiritual practices, have multiple gurus, and realize God and being married, being the ideal householder, and being the ideal sannyasi, in a way that's really unique, almost unprecedented.
Okay, so then, were they born that way, or did they take control over the human body? these realized souls.
I'm not sure about the two options.
Okay, so you're saying they're such a great example of the practices and what the practices can do. So were they born realized into that human body, or they're showing us, even if you have a human body, it's a great vessel to achieve these things, to realize these things?
Okay, I'm still not entirely clear what the... That's not helping.
Like
he just said, it's like high Christology and low Christology.
Well, were they born realized, or did they have to work at it?
Oh, I see. Okay, that's a simpler way of asking.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, I think that God, how can God not be born realized? But the point is, maybe the manifestation takes time. Yes. Right? I think that's the idea. To manifest it. But it's also his play, right? It's all part of the play. So that, yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you. And yeah, I don't think, see, the thing is, Sri Ramakrishna would say, ordinary souls come back because of their karma, but Ishvara kotis, they don't come back because of their own karma. There's no karma pulling them back here. They do it out of compassion for humanity, to help others out of their ignorance.
So they really don't have to do those practices. It's just...
No, yeah, I know, I don't think that they do, yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It was a fun class. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu